all the way up, all the way down. That's how you are supposed to train. Train in the full range of motion to get the best gains possible. And yes, even I've said that before, but as we know, unlike our bench press max, science is always evolving. So in this video, we're going to take a closer look at some new science that might challenge the popular belief that training in the full range of motion or doing full reps is indeed the best choice. First, what does it mean to train in the full range of motion? Simply put, it means to lift through the entire range a joint can safely articulate between full extension and full flexion. Think like the bicep curl, where you want to start at the very bottom, elbow straight and at full extension, and then lift all the way to the top, elbow bent and at full flexion. We've all been taught training this way with full reps and not partial reps because it's the best for both muscle and strength gains. And the research seemed quite clear about that. So how exactly can this be challenged? Well, it seems there's a bit of an important detail about partial reps that we don't discuss often enough. You see, when we hear partial reps, the first thing that comes in mind are probably shitty half-rep curls where you don't go below 90 degrees, or shallow squats where it looks like you're trying to remove a wedgie in both the most subtle and obvious way possible. But these examples only partially cover the many partial rep variations that exist. In fact, there are no fixed rules to how partial reps can be done. There's no rule to where you start and end a partial rep, nor are there rules on the percentage of the range covered. It can't be 10% or even 95% ROM. Now, if we blindly lump all partial rep variations together and then compare it to training in the full range of motion, then sure, research shows full ROM generally comes out on top. But the question is, are all partial reps really equal? Well, according to a 2023 study by Pedrosa and colleagues, it looks like the answer is clearly no. In the study, the researchers compared two partial rep variations of the preacher curl and measured their effects on muscle and strength. One group of subjects trained in a variation called the initial range of motion, starting at the bottom with arm fully straight and curling to about a 68-degree angle. Not sure why they didn't go 1 degree further, would have been nice. The other group, performing the variation called the final range of motion, started at that 68-degree angle and curled the rest of the way to the top. After 8 weeks of grueling training, it was shown that lifting in the initial ROM from bottom to 68 degrees was clearly more effective than lifting in the final ROM, yielding significantly greater biceps muscle growth and curling strength. So why was this initial range of motion better? More and more research has been showing that muscle contractions at longer muscle lengths tend to induce both greater metabolic and anabolic responses, two factors that can lead to greater muscle hypertrophy. So in theory, by training when the muscle is longest, you'll induce more of these hypertrophic factors, and your muscle is longest in that initial range of motion. The reason the initial ROM was better for strength as well probably boils down to specificity. In a preacher curl, the sticking point, or the most difficult point in a lift to surpass, occurs close to the bottom of the lift. It can then be reasonably speculated that the initial ROM group achieved greater strength gains because they were regularly training through that sticking point, whereas the other final ROM group did not. So based on these findings, it looks like doing partial reps in the initial range of motion can be highly effective. And truth be told, we've had research showing this before, but for some reason it hasn't made much noise in the mainstream, even though this information can be very helpful, especially in training and rehabilitation for older folks, beginners, and yeah, even your normal fitness folks getting in shape that don't really care to go ATG on the squat like some dude aspiring to be a competitive powerlifter 15 years too late. Yes, I'm talking about me. But I know what you're thinking. It's all sunshine and gravy that partial reps in the initial ROM is good, but we're leaving out the most important debate here. Can training in this initial range of motion stack up against the almighty full range of motion? Yes, the answer is yes. Another 2023 study, this time by Cassiano and colleagues, will give us a bit more insight. In this study, with calf muscles this time, the researchers not only compared muscle growth outcomes between training in the initial and final ranges of motion, but also pit them against, yes, full range of motion. In this case, the results showed that after 8 weeks, at a 3.4% relative increase, training in the final range of motion achieved the least growth in the medial calf muscle. With the full range of motion, a 6.7% relative increase was observed. And finally, training in the initial range of motion resulted in a relative increase of 15.2%. The lateral calf muscle was measured as well, where the numbers were not as statistically significant, but the effect sizes still favored the initial range of motion. What the heck happened? How is this exactly possible? Well, the researchers speculate that it has at least partially to do with that same theory of training in longer muscle lengths. But of course, that occurs in both initial and full range of motion training, so that itself doesn't really cover it. Well, there is one more thing. Throughout the intervention, subjects in the initial and final ROM groups were able to increase their total work volume at a quicker rate than those training in the full range of motion, probably because partial reps are physically easier to do. Whatever the case, that essentially means more work was done for the partial rep groups. And with training at higher volumes and long muscle lengths, this combination might be the reason training in the initial range of motion came out on top. Unfortunately, strength wasn't covered in this study. But fortunately, it was covered in a 2021 study also by Pedrosa and colleagues. In similar fashion, initial range of motion led to the greatest muscle gains, this time in the quad muscles. Strength gains, on the other hand, were similar between initial and full range of motion training. The reason? Well, just like how partial reps can allow you to work with more volume, partial reps in this study allowed subjects to train with heavier weights that they could not have lifted with the same number of reps at full range of motion. And as we know, training with heavy weights is an extremely important factor in strength development. So again, thanks to its physical simplicity, initial partial reps get another advantage, although this time only matching full range of motion rather than exceeding it. Now, even with all this data showcasing the very real benefit of initial partial reps and its very real potential of challenging training norms, I do want to dampen your spirits just a little bit with some cold hard context. The majority of these studies were conducted with untrained subjects, beginners. Unfortunately, this is a very common issue in general for fitness research. Well-trained subjects can be harder to come by and harder to convince to replace their current training routine with some funky science experiment. But the training adaptation differences between beginners and trained individuals are well documented, thus the findings here cannot be generalized to everyone. Also, it remains to be seen whether these findings carry over into multi-joint exercises and not just single-joint exercises like we see in these studies. Currently, data on certain multi-joint exercises like the squat lean in favor of training in the full range of motion, but rarely are they compared to training specifically in the initial range of motion. More research would be very nice. Okay, finally, let's look at the entire picture. Yes, some limitations do exist with partial reps, but I don't think it's ever been as clear as now that partial reps, as stigmatic as it is, can very well have a place in your program. There's still a lot of questions to answer and more data is always great, but we do have quite a consistency here. Now, I wouldn't go all out and change all your isolation single joint exercises to partial reps, especially if you've already been training for years and years. But I would definitely add it here and there, maybe throw in an extra set of partials to really push closer to failure and add a bit more volume. Things like squats and deadlifts though, I'll stick to occasionally training partials as secondary work while the bulk of the training will remain with full reps. But partial reps, at least initial partial reps, not as bad as an idea as we might have believed. Give it a shot, let me know what you think. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a full thumbs up and share it with your quarter squatting loving friends. Subscribe for more. As always, thank you for watching and don't forget to get your protein. Full protein.